Hello, folks, and welcome to the Crude Life's official video channel. I'm your host, Jason Spees. Please like, share, and follow this channel. You can also find us on our other affiliate pages on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. And of course, you can always find us at thecrudelife.com. Now, please enjoy this exclusive interview.
Well, good day, friends and listeners. Today we have a really wonderful opportunity to speak with Chrysta Castaneda, and she has quite an extensive background in not only engineering, but also in our legal system. And I'm going to let her tell you a bit more about herself. Good day. How are you doing today, Chrysta?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, so I am a degreed engineer and a lawyer, and have practiced in the oil and gas industry, mostly in commercial disputes arising in the upstream sector for the last 30 plus years. I have a lot of background on the things that I talk about relating to the environment and to regulation, and now the electric grid that failed in February of 2021. So happy to discuss any or all of those things.
Oh, absolutely. I kind of feel bad because that's such a mild way of putting the amount of background information that you have, or even what you do. Apparently, for those listening, Chrysta is the go-to lawyer. She's not just any lawyer; she's the go-to lawyer for some high-stakes litigation. And she actually had it was a verdict in 2016 that actually gained national attention, didn't it? And you were inducted into the elite trial lawyers of 2018 because of this really big case.
Yeah, it was a big oil and gas dispute and one of the largest verdicts in the nation. And I was the plaintiff attorney and the lead lawyer for a man known as T. Boone Pickens, who is since deceased, but used to be one of the most prominent businessmen in America back in the 1980s through like the early 2010s.
Yeah, I've been looking into a bit about you, and I'm very impressed. It seemed like quite an interesting case.
It was a fascinating case. Took a long time to try, very complex, but in the end, it was good to win it.
How did you get into this specific kind of niche of the oil field and gas and law?
Yeah, great question. So I came out of engineering school in 1985, prepared to go to work as an engineer in oil and gas. And that was one of the historic downturns. We hit these cycles where it's a boom bust industry, and that was a bust. And it remained so for about 6 or 8 years afterwards. So I actually went into designing computer systems to run oil and gas production companies, and did that for 3 years. Decided I still really liked the challenges that the industry faced, but really hated writing code, and it was COBOL code at the time, some listeners may know what that means, but it ran all the business systems and still does in some places, but it's a really, really old language. Anyway, went back to law school and have kind of, focused on technical litigation ever since, and with a specialty in oil and gas technical litigation.
And so does that keep you pretty busy then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That plus my side pursuits of writing books and running for public office.
I had seen that you had run for the Texas Railroad Commission here this last year. I'd also looked into, by the way, you did a fantastic job with the campaign ad that I saw on the website. I thought that was so well put together.
Oh, well, thanks very much. Well, there was an important environmental issue to run on, which is Railroad Commission is our oil and gas regulator in Texas, and the amount of waste of the natural gas that's produced in the form of flaring, which is just lighting it on fire when it comes up out of the well, is enough to power every home in Texas continuously if we would only turn that natural gas into electricity. And so I ran really hard on that because it's been against the law for over 100 years, but yet the Railroad Commission just allows operators to obtain permits to go ahead and burn that natural gas, which would have been enormously useful during the Great Freeze of last month.
So how could they utilize that gas in a manner that would create electricity rather than burning it off? And why would that have not been done already, I guess?
Yeah, great question. The answer, long and short of it, is it's economics. If it's cheaper for the operators to light it on fire, the Railroad Commission lets them do that, even though it's terrible from an environmental perspective and just a waste perspective, and it's against everything that our state resources laws are founded on, which is to prevent that waste. But what they could do, because the technology has been out there for a long time, is use generators, natural gas driven generators, to generate their own electricity, and actually form microgrids that would not only supply their own electric needs, which would keep their equipment running in these cold snaps like last month, but also they'd have excess electricity to sell into the grid, and all of that electricity could actually be used to power all of the homes in Texas.
Wow, how easy of a transition do you think that it would be to create some kind of a grid like this?
Well, I don't think it's that hard. I think it just requires political will. And there are a few challenges, like having enough gas in the right places to drive the generators. But it's certainly something that the Railroad Commission and the Texas Legislature could see to easily.
Well, I wonder if there will be anything that comes of it, since you brought that issue to everyone's attention this last year. Have you heard any movement in that direction since then, I guess?
Well, I do think that there is a hard assessment going on based on the electric grid failure and the role of natural gas. And let me just back up a minute. The reason the grid went down, according to this testimony that was provided to the Texas legislature, is that the power generators who rely on electricity could not get enough natural gas at the right pressures to drive their plants and generate the electricity. And the natural gas producers are saying that they couldn't produce enough natural gas and get it into the pipeline because their equipment runs on electricity. So when the electricity went down, the natural gas supply went down. And when the natural gas supply went down, the electricity went down. So they were
Oh
mutually
no.
dependent on each other. So there is legislation and legislative efforts going on to see how we can fix that whole system. So I do think there's going to be something to come out of it. I'm not entirely sure how global a fix it will be, but I'm sure some things will come out of it.
So I guess out of curiosity, do you think that they're going to be taking a look at it, specifically oil and gas, or do you think that it's going to be more of an integration with the rest of the different types of energy generators, like wind turbines, for example, or solar powers? Because I had heard some speculation that they had something to do with that freeze off, but largely it kind of did get placed at the feet of oil and gas.
It did. There were early reports that wind turbines had frozen and that they were contributing to the lack of electrical capacity. But those, I think, reports have largely been debunked. The wind and solar were only expected to contribute 5%, I believe, to the capacity in the winter months, and they ended up contributing 6 or 7%. Meanwhile, the big hole in our capacity and our electrical, the ability to provide electricity was because of these natural gas plants falling offline.
What about the nuclear energy? I'd seen one article mention something about nuclear energy failure, but again, it was largely placed at oil and gas. So I wonder, what role do you think that played?
So nuclear had it did not fail to perform at the same level that natural gas generated electric
Okay.
did. But I think one we only have two plants, and I think one plant did go offline for a period of time. I'm not entirely sure how much it contributed or why it went offline.
Just kind of an interesting thing to look at, I guess. Makes me wonder how much of a holistic approach will be taken when trying to prepare so that this something like this doesn't happen again, I guess. It's
Yeah,
curious.
it's a great question. I don't know what the political will is to overhaul, all of our agency overstructure, because that's what's actually going to be required.
Okay. Well, okay. So aside from the flaring issues, what was something else that you had seen, or did you see anything else that was kind of a big issue when it came to what is becoming known as the climate crisis, I guess?
Yeah. So during my campaign, another issue that I really highlighted was the intentional release of methane, not flaring it, not lighting on fire, but just simply what they call venting it to the atmosphere, which is actually even worse than lighting it on fire. At least you're consuming the methane, which is, many, many times, 25 to 40 times. 25 to 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So it's better to burn it than it is to release it in its unaltered form into the atmosphere, and it's going on all the time. In fact, unfortunately, when you highlight the fact that people are flaring, then they tend to just put out the fire and still vent the gas. Which is illegal as well. There is no excuse for venting, either intentionally or by leaks, yet it's going on all the time.
Now, out of curiosity, excuse me, with it going on all the time, should someone be caught venting or flaring without a permit? And I'm assuming that venting does not have any kind of permit, available to allow that. Am I correct?
That is correct.
So should someone get caught venting or flaring, what kind of fines or penalties would they be looking at facing?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think the answer for the environmental community is generally way too low. And it depends on, I mean, there really aren't any meaningful penalties for being caught. And furthermore, there's not enough money put into staff and measures to actually enforce this, some of which could be done, by remote sensors. Um, and they tend to be prosecuted as, administrative violations rather than health and safety violations. So the fines per day are even lower when they stick. The railroad commissioners themselves have had a pattern of overturning what the enforcement staff recommends. So it's not a good situation, and there's no meaningful enforcement.
Oh, well, yeah, that sounds rather precarious, I suppose, and kind of makes you wonder what may be coming, I suppose, in the near future, or if anything will be coming since you are not holding that position. What would have been the first thing that you would have done had you been elected to the commission?
I would have taken these flaring exception permits off consent agenda. And just not to get too deep in the weeds, but there are 3 commissioners, and all of the exception permits that are recommended by the administrative staff go through on consent agenda. And that means that if all 3 commissioners say yes, then there isn't actually a hearing held on it. I would have pulled at least some of the bigger exception permits from the consent agenda and had a public hearing on it.
Interesting. Well, I guess there's a whole lot of changes all over the place. It'll be interesting to see if and where any of this, goes, if anyone's listening to your ideas and might, push that into being, I suppose, since these are elected positions. I guess that would be one way of doing it. What is there something that you're doing? Is there any way that you're looking to try and create change from your position right now?
Yes. So I've been doing a lot of advocacy work. I've been doing a lot of TV and radio and podcasts and written opinions on, in particular, the grid failure and how our policies contributed to the lack of, energy reliability here in Texas. So I've been doing a lot of speaking on that just to bring attention to the fact that our agencies and their routine failures to enforce our laws actually did play a role in bringing the grid down.
Well, and I remember earlier you said that you are writing books as well.
Well, I have written a book. It's called The Last Trial of T. Boone Pickens, and it's about that trial that you discussed earlier. And I've also done some podcasts on that. So if people are interested in that, it's called The Last Trial of T. Boone Pickens, and it's I hope it's appealing to people, not just because it's the story of a trial, but also because it's the story of there are too few women lawyers, and particularly in positions like I have been, blessed to have these opportunities. And so it's a story of a woman, fighting oil companies and winning.
Well, and in honor of Women's History Month, that's kind of like a book club recommendation right there.
Well,
Go
I
check
hope
it out.
so.
The real
I hope
story.
so.
The real story of a successful woman on her way to make things right. Yeah, that's awesome. That's fantastic. I guess I'm not sure entirely how to phrase the question, and it's kind of slightly off from what we were talking about, but I guess from an engineering perspective, I remember Chairman Craddock mentioning programs looking into the carbon sequestration and whatnot, and trying to utilize carbon capturing methods down there. Do you see anything in Texas along those lines happening? Do you think maybe that might contribute to a part of the solution, I guess, from an engineering standpoint?
Yeah, so I do think that there is movement afoot to do some things that are more environmentally sensitive, but I don't think it's being driven by the initiatives of our elected officials. I think it's because industry knows that they have got to do something different. Your listeners have probably heard about the calls by investors to um, have a better you know, they call it, global safety and environmental initiative, GSE kind of, or greenhouse gas and safety initiatives. Depends on how the particular entity is defining their program, but they want responsible investment into companies that limit their carbon footprint. So I think these companies are really driving things forward more than the regulator.
And that has actually come up in conversation quite a bit lately, is the push from not only the public, but also from investors into having more accountability when it comes to environmentally responsible practices. So,
Right.
um,
Yes.
where do you think that I guess is going to take things in the near future? Do you see anything coming of that anytime soon? I know that, like I said, it's been talked about quite a bit.
Well, I think you're already seeing the some of the big companies take a lead on this and talk about the fact that they're taking a lead on it. And in fact, I think they're starting to, transition to energy companies, not necessarily oil and gas companies, right? Because they see our energy supply coming from, different sources in the future than the current mix we have.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see where all of this is going to end up. There's so much going on right now. I actually, right before you had called, I was just looking over another article talking about the 21 states that are now involved in that litigation about the Keystone XL pipeline. So it kind of seems like the entire industry is just in a change movement right now. I'm not sure what word I'm looking for, but a transition,
Yeah,
an interesting transition.
I think it is an inflection point. I mean, I think it's been going on for a while. I think it will continue to go on. When it comes to the Keystone XL pipeline, I think that the motives of the AGs who are suing over it are mainly political and not necessarily problem solving. Um, and I don't know that, honestly, in Texas in particular, there was a great hue and cry for the product that would be delivered by that pipeline, because we have plenty of product to be delivered here in Texas. So um, it is interesting. It is interesting to see where people are spending their efforts, though.
It certainly is. Well, and I guess you might have kind of a unique perspective on how people are feeling just because of getting to talk with your clientele, for example. Are there any concerns that you see that have been arising more so lately? Anything that people are kind of wary about in the future, near future, I guess?
Most of what I spend my time litigating over is accounting for what's happened in the past, right? I deal solely on the commercial side of things, and so I'm representing royalty owners against operators, or I'm representing working interest owners against each other, or in the past have spent quite a bit of time representing operators directly. So most of it is backward looking. I would say this: I am seeing increasingly that people are litigating over the issue of accounting for this flared gas. So I do think that that's going to continue to have some economic pressures. And then I'm just also, though, observing that there is, the investments have really fallen off in the industry, which plays itself out a lot in what I do, because we value things in terms of future income streams, even though it's based on, past actions. You try to figure out, okay, well, if they drilled that well or not drilled that well, what's the net future impact? And those calculuses are changing too.
Yeah, there's a lot of analysis. It seems like that would be involved in looking over that part of the industry. So many moving pieces.
Absolutely.
So I also had a thought. I feel kind of maybe like I'm kind of directing this conversation. I was wondering, if is there something that you think that would be noteworthy to discuss, something that you would like to talk about a little bit?
Well, I believe in the power of the people who work in this industry to change and have and develop ingenious solutions for what faces us. I mean, when you look at, we've only had oil for 150 years, right? I mean, it hasn't always been with us, and it has changed really dramatically over the course of those 150 years. And gas the same way. I mean, we don't do things the way we did even 5 years ago. So things are constantly evolving, and I believe in the power of change and in the power of the people in the industry to find creative solutions to the problems that face us, including the problem of producing, oil and gas responsibly and limiting carbon footprint. And I also believe in the power of the industry to adapt to new forms of energy. Um, I think I'd like to encourage your audience to not get stuck in the past and not believe that's the only way to go about it. And unfortunately, there is a segment of the industry that does want to remain in the past and in the old ways of doing things and is slow to change. But that's not the entirety of the industry, and I just want to encourage people to do what they know how to do, which is provide innovative solutions that can get us to a better place.
Yeah, that does seem to be the way of things. I have heard uh, leanings toward that direction more and more, especially with the younger demographic of individuals working within the oil and gas industry. That kind of seem to be leaning more toward the more green solutions. So I would imagine there will be a bit of pushback, but it seems as though the industry is already kind of transitioning. Out of curiosity, and I don't know if you would have any insight or if you would know anything about this, but out of curiosity, should we pull back from the oil and gas industry as much? And how do you think that would affect the environment on an internal level? Kind of a random question. I apologize, but I mean, as far as like pressure buildup, even.
I think I know. I think I mean, I don't. I'm not going to speak so much to operating characteristics of reservoir depletion and all of that if we're not producing as much, because I think that's going to be dependent on where you are and what you're dealing with. But I will speak to this. I do think that to the extent we transition away from oil and gas into a different mix of energy, that it needs to be thoughtful, including one of my big concerns even during the campaign was the abandoned infrastructure. We've got to figure out what to do about infrastructure that's multiple times more likely to leak product if it's not tended to, and who's going to pay for the costs of tending to that infrastructure, because we have not provided for that in the past. So I think that we've got to have a thoughtful transition, and we've got to be thinking about what's next. That it's just somebody's got to be doing that. And right now, I'm not seeing a holistic approach to dealing with those issues.
Okay. I appreciate you obliging my question. That was kind of out of left field, I think, um, but no, yeah, I agree. It's kind of interesting to consider all of the issues that may not be taken into consideration as we're trying to move toward a positive solution to things. It kind of goes back into something like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Yeah.
Working so hard so that something doesn't happen and end up creating a bigger problem. It's kind of interesting, and I don't know nearly enough to even speculate on theories. So thank you for sharing.
I'm happy to just provide what information and insight I can. I don't claim to be an expert on really any of these things, but I'm somebody who's spent a long time thinking about a lot of these things, and I have some background to be able to hopefully give a relatively informed opinion.
Right. Well, and I appreciate the insight. I find it to be absolutely intriguing. So much knowledge. I'll be excited to see if any of the conversations that you started on your campaign trail, and then since then, even with all of the podcasts and writings that you've been doing, I'll be curious to see where that goes.
Well, thank you. It's always interesting, and there's always new questions. So I'm happy to try to, again, speak up on what I know.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to speak up with me today. If in the future, if you have any big updates or anything that you would like to share, absolutely, please feel free to reach out so that we can get you back on to talk about it.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
All right, my friends, that was Chrysta Castaneda, and she is a brilliant mind out of Texas, the founding owner of Casteneda Law Firm. She ran for the Texas Railroad Commission this last year. She's got an engineering background as well, so much. I hope that you guys were able to enjoy that entire interview. And if you did find the content intriguing, interesting, or riveting in any way, make sure to go and check out the rest of what the Crude life has to offer.